So, good Erev Shabbos. It's almost Shabbos here in Sullivan County, New York. I'm heading over to Pennsylvania just for a few minutes for Shabbos. A little bit of work, and come right back with God's help. And it's almost Rosh Hashanah. And really, I should be talking about Rosh Hashanah, Parshas Nitzavim. A lot of things to talk about. But unfortunately, politics is really getting in the way. I guess for lack of better term here. Now, I spent way too much time on Twitter, just like I spend way too much time on YouTube. At least YouTube I can put ads. So, and I've been noticing I always tend to look up things about communities that are, seeking to grow. Hasidic communities are seeking to grow in my general area. I have some connections to. For example, there's a small village in my county, in Sullivan County, called Bloomingburg, where there's a small Hasidic community looking to grow. About a half hour from there, an hour from my home in Orange County, there's the village of Kiryas Joel, which is a rather large Hasidic community, which is also, growing. It's about seeking to grow. It is growing, and they're seeking to really be good neighbors and develop within their own borders, rather than going into other neighborhoods where their political power, just by being there, might seem to be a detriment to the neighbors. And so, even though I'm sure a lot of folks there would much prefer to have lower density housing, they're sacrificing their lifestyles to have higher density housing in order to avoid certain political problems that exist in these type of communities. And they're being met with a tremendous backlash by people who say this is not, that the high density housing in these relatively rural areas are not sustainable. That's a term that we hear time and time again. This is not sustainable growth, not sustainable development. I remember I gave a lecture in a college. It's actually on YouTube, not the entire lecture, just the first hour I was able to record. Although you can't really see me, but you can hear the lecture. It's here on my channel on YouTube. And after this lecture, which is not in, at the end where there's questions and answers, which was not recorded, a young lady, she asked, how does Kiryas Joel see themselves sustainable? I wasn't really specifically talking about Kiryas Joel. I was just talking in general about getting to know more about the Hasidic communities. But this question came up: sustainability. Sustainable, that's a buzzword that they use. Now, if you get into the real meat and potatoes of this term, sustainable development, sustainable growth, and so forth, it is very, very, very scary stuff. I'm bringing this up now for one thing, is that I see some folks trying to link the Hasidic communities to some larger leftist Jewish cabal, which could not be further from the truth. The Hasidic communities are the bitter opponents. I'm not going to use the term enemies, but they bitterly and strongly oppose secularism, and not all secular Jews, of course. I'm not talking about your average person, but there are people in the leadership of the secular Jewish world, many of which most secular Jews don't really care much about, don't know much about, who have some kind of an agenda, and it's part of a wider globalist agenda as well. But it's well known that the Hasidic communities, particularly those in Kiryas Joel and Bloomingburg, and a quite large one in Williamsburg, although there are other communities around the world, oppose the Zionist movement in all forms. However, they'll certainly see more of a camaraderie, in a sense, to the religious Zionists, even though they disagree with them, but they don't see them as being practicing another religion or something. They just strongly disagree. As you know, within the realms of Judaism, dissent is sacrosanct. I mean, I would almost say, it's one of the pillars of Judaism is dissent, and that there are different movements, different ideas, different ideologies, and that's part of the beauty of Judaism, is that it's not monolithic, but that's again within the realm of Judaism, within the realm of halakha, of the Jewish faith, and these type of things, which of course the secular have nothing to do with and don't believe in, and they have risen up against. Now, what's interesting about this then is I've seen people on Twitter saying things like, if anybody else but Jews would try to do what they do in Kiryas Joel or Bloomingburg, there would be an uproar, and the uproar would come from the Jews. And it's a big confusion, because these people call themselves Jews, these people who make the uproar, these liberals, these leftists, these secularists, these globalists, these secular Zionists, and so forth, many of which really don't even have much to do with Zionism anymore. These type of people, they are the ones who are fighting against Bloomingburg, Kiryas Joel, and these type of things. There is much stronger opposition against Bloomingburg, Kiryas Joel, and other similar communities from among secular Jews than there is among Christian Gentiles. And let's look at this more deeply, because again, I mentioned a moment ago this term sustainable development, sustainable growth. I want people, especially because there are a lot of people who are well-meaning Christians, Gentiles, righteous Gentiles, good people, good loyal Americans, who have been swept up in the stream of these groups. Like, there's a group called United Monroe, there's a group called the Rural Community Coalition, and so forth, all of which are secularists, many of which are secular Jews, Zionists, things like that, but not exclusively. Although some, you never know, some of them, they might hide their Jewish identity. I wouldn't be surprised, some of them, which really doesn't matter, because as far as I'm concerned, these secularists, Judaism to me is a religion, it's not a race. And these people who don't go to synagogue even on the high holidays, and then they're going to be like, well, I'm not an anti-Semite because I'm Jewish and my grandfather was an Orthodox Jew and this and that, blah, blah, blah. Well, that doesn't matter, because if you don't believe in Judaism, you're a different religion now. Yes, by Jewish law, you're a Jew, but if you don't believe in Jewish law, so how can you call yourself a Jew? I, as a believer, can refer to you as a Jew because that's in the lens of my religion. But if you don't believe in that religion, why would you call yourself by that title? Unless you had some agenda, some reason. I mean, I don't understand some people do it for family reasons. There are reasons why some people do it, even they're not believers. But I really don't understand. So, in any event, what I want to bring out here was this buzzword that we hear of sustainability, sustainable growth, sustainable development, which they're saying Kiryas Joel, Bloomingburg are not. Why are they building these high-density places in the rural area? Well, we want to do it, and we want anybody to do it. I mean, if you listen, there's two people who are highly reputable. Not talking about conspiracy theorists, not talking about wackos, talking about mainstream conservative thought. Glenn Beck, who I think is a modern day prophet, and Mark Levin. And both of them have been speaking about this issue. Mark Levin has been talking about the degrowther movement, people trying to stop development, how the government takes over land to prevent development, to stop development. Everything becomes a national park, and this is all rooted in the progressive movement, in the Roosevelts, both Teddy and Franklin. Both of them were progressives. Just because Teddy Roosevelt was a Republican, and of course Franklin Roosevelt was a Democrat, the party affiliation doesn't really matter. The problem is this ideology of progressivism, which Teddy Roosevelt was a major figure in the progressive movement, and he pushed this progressive ideology particularly with the national park system. And Obama has just been left and right declaring things to be national parks, national monuments, national this, national that. Bring the federal government more and more into our lives, places where it was never intended to be. When the founders made the Constitution, they were scared to death, the founders, when they made this Constitution, that it would give the government too much power, and they framed the Constitution to prevent that, and yet the progressives they don't care. Woodrow Wilson, who was the arch progressive and probably one of the worst men to ever visit the White House, let alone live in it as president in history, as far as keeping America to its founding principles, he said, well, the Constitution is a living and breathing document. And ever since then, the progressives love to say this. And yes, the Constitution can change by means of amendments. There's an amendment process. But you can't just, interpret things in the Constitution that never were. And yet, particularly since Roosevelt, we've seen the Supreme Court just become a legislative branch instead of a judicial branch, which, when the idea of judicial review came about, Jefferson was scared to death. I mean, it happened in his time, Marbury versus Madison, but it never got to the level that it did until Franklin Roosevelt's time. But Jefferson warned that the court could become a tyrannical oligarchy of the judiciary. And that is what it has become, particularly since Roosevelt's time. Roosevelt himself is well known that he tried to pack the courts. He tried to add extra seats to the court in order to get his vision to come to fruition. And what he was prevented from doing so in his early time, but the mere fact that he was president longer than any other president in history, he was able to accomplish it. And we see time and time again since his time that the courts have developed into almost the tyrannical oligarchy that's a second legislative branch, as opposed to the judicial branch that is intended to be by the framers of the Constitution. All right, now let's put that aside now. The executive branch is also, we know, overstepped its bounds. Executive orders have gone haywire. Also, legislating unconstitutionally by executive order. And that's also part of the progressive agenda. And again, this has happened both under Republicans and under Democrats. George H.W. Bush, particularly, was guilty of this. And that's what I'm getting to with this term sustainable development. Because the UN, which was, came out of Woodrow Wilson's brainchild of the League of Nations, which thankfully really failed, but unfortunately was replaced by this UN. The UN has this globalist goal they call Agenda 21. Now, I want you to see particularly what Glenn Beck has spoken about Agenda 21. This is the reason, people, why leftist globalists, Emily Convert from the United Monroe openly admits to being a liberal progressive. This is why these type of people are fighting against developments in Curious Joe and in Bloomington, these places. Not because they care about the environment, not because of anything else, but because they want to control the world. It's an extremely scary thing. I don't have to go over the whole thing now, Agenda 21. There are plenty of videos on YouTube that talk about Agenda 21, but when you know this, you should know that the Hasidic communities are really the canary in the coal mine, because the leftist globalists are seeking to take away all of our freedoms, particularly freedom of religion, but many other freedoms as well. And it's a scary thing. Of course, we have faith in God. Of course, we know in the end everything's going to be okay. But it's extremely, and we know Mashiach is going to come eventually. And people of other faiths also have that same hope in their lives, even if they believe in a different Messiah. It's a comforting idea, but still, it's very scary. I mean, it's particularly a reason why it's so imperative to vote against Hillary Clinton. I'm not particularly supporting Donald Trump, but he's the only one who has any chance against Hillary. He's not that great. He also has this, he's also pretty much a leftist, a liberal, but he's not a globalist in the way that Hillary is. Hillary, of course, the Clintons, they have their Clinton Global Initiative. They're major globalists. And so that's what we have to be worried about, is this globalist agenda. And this Agenda 21, it's scary stuff. They want to reduce the population. It's basically it's the Holocaust on steroids.